Right, as we normally do when there's such huge news here on the AM Report, we're chatting to our reporter Philasande Sixaba about the news that broke this morning around about 3:30 a.m. Here in South Africa. Phila, good morning. First of all, good or bad decision by SA Rugby to not allow the Springboks to go to Australia?
Yeah, good morning, Benjamin. I think it's a difficult one to actually decide whether it's good or bad, because it has so many pros, it has so many cons. I think the pros is that the decision was made in the benefit of player welfare. You'd know that the South African rugby competition is only about a week old, and there were other two games, including the green and gold match that played at Newlands 2 weeks ago, and of course that Super Rugby fan Saturday match that played, which kicked off the South African domestic competition here in the country. But it also brings the financial side of things into light. The SA Rugby has already been depleted in terms of its financial coffers this year. The test matches against Scotland and Georgia were cancelled during that June-July period, and that put a heavy strain on the coffers of SA Rugby. And of course, the participation in the Rugby Championship would have guaranteed them a 110 million rand of revenue income. So it's a difficult decision to say, well, this is a good decision or not, because it has so many implications in terms of its financial loss. But of course, the player welfare was the most important and deciding decision that SA Rugby took in terms of pulling the Springboks out of the Rugby Championship this year.
Let's talk about those implications you speak about, Phila. What was the worst case scenario for the Springboks if they had travelled to Australia?
I think the worst case scenario would have been a plethora of injuries, Benjamin. Also, the availability of overseas-based players, those guys that are playing in Ireland, Japan, Scotland, England, faced a longer time in terms of getting into Australia and quarantining. Maybe they would have missed the first two rounds of the Rugby Championship, and that would have put quite a big strain on Jacques Nienaber as head coach, a big strain on Rassie Erasmus as director of rugby at SA Rugby. But also those countries are also going to be imposing some other stringent measures in terms of curbing the COVID-19 pandemic. It would have made it very difficult for those players to actually even get out of those countries and into Australia. So I think those are the things that were under consideration for SA Rugby in terms of pulling them out of the Rugby Championship. There's so many worst case scenarios that would have come about with actually going to Australia. But also the reputational damage that would have brought by sending an understrength, undercooked squad to Australia and get beaten by the likes of Australia, New Zealand, and of course Argentina in this four test nation tournament. And that wouldn't have been a good look, considering the fact that South Africa are world champions. It's a reputational damage for them to go over there and get a hiding to those teams. And of course, there's so much expectation from the Springboks after they won that Rugby World Cup.
So more about brand Springboks than anything else regarding the performance. Facing the All Blacks and Wallabies cold would not be such a good idea for coach Jacques Nienaber and those around him. But also, Phila, the Springboks are facing the British and Irish Lions next year. And does this not then put them in a significant disadvantage, having not faced the toughest opponents, certainly in the last decade and a half?
Well, Benjamin, I think it's going to be difficult to actually predict what might happen at that British and Irish Lions 12 next year. And that's the only international engagement that South Africa will have since winning the Rugby World Cup in Japan in 2019. Remember, this whole year they wouldn't have played any test rugby, and their only next international engagement is that crucial British and Irish Lions tour of 2021. But I think in terms of preparation point of view, the domestic competitions that are ongoing now are going to help and going to aid in terms of getting the players ready for that British and Irish Lions tour of next year. But I think the uncertainty of the Pro 16 and what happens and what the domestic scene looks like for South Africa next year might contribute to some of the anxieties going into that British and Irish Lions tour. But I think it's something that SA Rugby have considered and have put in measures to try and curb. But it is going to be very, very difficult, having not had any test rugby prior to that British and Irish Lions tour. Go back to 2009, where we won 2-1 here in South Africa, and you see how New Zealand did against the British and Irish Lions. You see how Australia did against the British and Irish Lions. It also puts pressure on the Springboks to perform in that series also. So I think it's a blessing in disguise somewhat to not have any test rugby, but I think the domestic scene needs to be sorted out as quickly as possible so people and players know where they are playing, when and how, so that they can be ready for that British and Irish Lions tour for next year.
And Pila, before I let you go, there's been a strained relationship between SA Rugby and SANZA in recent times, with talk of South Africa possibly joining the Northern Hemisphere and going to the Six Nations. Does this further exacerbate the situation between the two parties?
I think that SANZA alliance in general, Benjamin, has been in tatters for quite a while now. It's not only SA Rugby that have a poor relationship with SANZA. New Zealand are also under fire. Australia are also pulling in their own direction. And I think that has, all those complexities have, sort of contributed to how the SANZA alliance has sort of seemingly broken down over the recent times. And I think COVID-19 also has contributed to that immensely in terms of the strained relationship. But I think what South Africa's intentions have been in recent times, and you remember that statement that they put out a couple of weeks ago signifying their intentions of moving north to join an expanded Pro 16 tournament, are an eventuality now. So I think as soon as those logistics are sorted out, everybody who's going to be on board in that expansion needs to know the clarity as soon as possible, so that everybody can start preparing for that 2021 domestic season.
All right, Philasande, Sixaba, we're going to leave it there for now, and we'll continue to watch the situation closely, particularly that relationship I speak of between SA Rugby as well as SANZA. The possibility of completely moving out of the Southern Hemisphere competitions to join the Six Nations out in Europe is still very much alive. The Springboks is the big news this morning. They have withdrawn from this year's Rugby Championship, set to be hosted by Australia from the end of this month.